My affiliation goes back many, many years when I met Jens Kugele at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And he was, I think, a PhD student there. And I gave a lecture and we immediately connected. We talked about literature and media and all kinds of common interests. And when Jens Kugele joined the center, then he kindly invited me for a keynote lecture in 2021. At that time, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of COVID, online. So this was a challenge, but it was a wonderful opportunity to really talk in depth about a topic and get nice feedback. So that was my first official engagement with the center. And then I had the honor to be appointed Distinguished Research Fellow a couple of years ago, together with 3 other international colleagues. And I mean, this was a very important step in my career because this really allowed me to get engaged with the mission and the curricula and the activities of the center. So that was the beginning, and now I'm happy to be back for 3 wonderful days with a keynote lecture on sound studies, literature, and media. First of all, it's a very welcoming atmosphere. Reflected, we talked about the architecture, the open windows. Seminar rooms have windows to the hallways. So this is important because it sends visitors like me a nice message that, you're welcome. And I met people in the hallway. This morning I talked with 2 colleagues downstairs for an hour and had follow-up talks today. So this kind of exchange, semi-formal, informal exchange, is very, very important in the context of the center's mission. That cultures are interconnected, they are open-ended, they are dialogic, and that again is nicely reflected in the architecture and in the institutional setup of the center. Yes, this is really important because it is always asked, what is culture or what are cultures? And we live in a global world of, literally innumerable interconnections culturally, but maybe for good reasons, we don't have a uniform theory of what culture in the singular is. And what fascinates me with the center here is that you are pluralizing cultures, but not, if I understand this correctly, in a sense that various cultures sort of coexist independently of one another, but that cultures intersect and interrelate and interrogate each other in a productive way. And then the question is, how do we do it? And you came up with 8 or 10 research groups arranged by specific concepts. And I am particularly interested in the research area of cultural memory, where, of course, Professor Ansgar, the founder, is preeminent. But also there is a cluster on narratology, which relates to my literary interests, and another cluster on performativity. And that relates to my current interest in the intersection of 2 cultures, the literary culture, literary imagination, and sound studies. And it's interesting that there is a 4th research group centered on visual and material cultures. And if I may, I would be more than delighted to supplement that with some kind of input in the area of sound studies, because visual cultures and sound cultures, of course, supplement and interrogate each other. So I hope we can pursue that in the future. Yeah, my PhD work was in German modernism. I wrote my dissertation on Kafka, and for decades my publications were mainly in literary modernism. And I still consider myself centered on literary culture. But in a sense that I increasingly recognize that literary textuality is always already affiliated and intersects with visual culture, with sonic culture, and that led me to be interested in sound studies, especially because my scholarly interests center on literary modernism. But my second great love is playing the harpsichord and the organ, where I focus exclusively almost on Baroque repertoire. And that tension, that productive tension between the two seemingly unrelated fields made me aware that there are nonetheless some secret interconnections that I have tried to work out and articulate in my current work on questions like how is music interrelated with literature, how is music represented in literature, how do sounds go beyond what verbal discourses may articulate, the relationship between sonic immediacy, our immediate bodily affective experience of sound, versus our verbal reflection of what that sound may have meant. And of course, importantly, and this also relates to an important mission of the center, how are literary texts and sound represented or reproduced in media technologies, in technological media. So put briefly, my interest is in the sort of Mercedes star configuration of sonic immediacy, media technological reproduction, and the literary imagination. But as I said, I consider myself quite emphatically a literary scholar that considers literature always already being open to other media. My latest interest is my absolute fascination with Friedrich Hölderlin, arguably the most eminent poet around 1800 in German classical romantic period. And the reason is that Hölderlin is not a modernist, but he anticipates writing techniques that were fully unfolding in modernism: fragmentation, self-reflexivity, and intermediality. Because Hölderlin considered himself a poet who articulated his written poetry as Gesang, Saitenspiel, and Lied, song, lyre playing, and other musical activities. And so I am currently working on the ways Hölderlin seeks to work out a musical sonic performativity within the poetic autonomy of the texts that he wrote. This is extremely difficult, and I'm just beginning to think through it, because again, the question is, Hölderlin sticks to the notion, the classical romantic notion of poetic autonomy, but considers that activity in musical terms, in terms of musical performativity, that goes beyond the self-enclosed poetic autonomy of the classical idealist period. Yeah, first of all, of course, again, the wonderful opportunity to give a keynote lecture and a follow-up workshop. I learned as much from those activities as possibly my audience did, and especially through lots of follow-up talks. I met with 2 colleagues in German studies, and of course I had several wonderful follow-up talks with members of the center here, faculty and students. So I am really inspired in new ways about how cultures interrelate, how they reinforce or question one another within a very nuanced curriculum of coursework and PhD projects and keynote lecture programs and workshops and so on. So the wonderful thing about the center is that there is a well-established institutional, organizational, and pedagogical structure that enables all kinds of PhD students and guest lecturers to talk about their subject within a larger frame of conceptual culture.